Good morning. It's Thursday, March 24th, the daily weather briefing for today. We got an active weather pattern with potential severe weather today, and some possible big severe weather later on in the week. We'll look at, or next week, we'll look at that a little bit closer when we get look at the 5-day forecast here. Let's get started for today's weather. And we'll look at today's chart. And over the Pacific Northwest, we've got some scattered showers and snow showers, mainly over Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and some areas of Montana. But generally, the weather's pretty nice out here with temperatures ranging from the upper 20s to around 70 degrees out here by Yuma. Going to the central portion of the United States, they're recovering from the big snows they had yesterday, especially in Denver with blizzard conditions that they had there. Temperatures are a little bit cooler there as the wind whips around out of the northeast and north around that deep low pressure system just a little bit north of St. Louis there. Temperatures will remain cool and dry throughout this period, but really the big weather is out here in the Midwest and southeastern portion of the United States with a deep low that's out here by about Springfield, Illinois. And we've got a large area of showers and a few isolated thunderstorms north of the warm front with some intense freezing precipitation showing up on radar here across Michigan, Wisconsin, and northern Illinois, just north of Chicago there. And then south of that, in the warm sector, we've got a large area of lines of showers and thunderstorms extending all the way from northern Indiana all the way down to the Gulf Coast here. Temperatures ahead of this front range from around 45 to about the low 80s out here in Florida. And then northeast portion of the United States, still Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont are still showing temperatures in the below 30 degrees, and so they're still getting snow up there, and they'll probably get some snow tomorrow as this storm system moves up that direction. It'll probably be mixed snow and rain, as the temperatures should moderate a little bit, but it's going to be close there, but nothing super bad at this point in time. Looking at the watch warning map, again, not quite as active as yesterday, but we do have winter storm watches and warnings in effect for New England, and winter weather advisories along northern portions of New York there. That's for the snow today. Winter storm warning continues over northern Michigan, and winter weather advisory over the upper part of Michigan and back into portions of Wisconsin there. High wind watch warnings in effect for portions of Ohio down through Kentucky, and a wind advisory in central Tennessee. And there's some more wind advisories out here and red flag warnings out here along the east coast around the Delmarva location. Potential freeze could take place over southeastern portions of Missouri tomorrow morning, as temperatures will be getting very cold there as they get a nice influx of cooler weather later today or later tonight. And then a high wind watch out here continues for portions of southwest Arkansas, extreme eastern portions of Texas, and northwestern portions of Louisiana. And then continued fire weather watches out here continue with strong winds out here, portions of Oklahoma and in New Mexico. And then out in the west here, we have some wind advisories also out here in Idaho with a wind warning out there near Boise. And also some winter weather advisories continue over northern portions of Colorado and southern portions of Wyoming. And then some more winter weather advisories across the northwest here as this storm system pulls in there throughout this day. Looking at the eastern satellite, you can see our storm system very clearly. The wraparound moisture associated with the storm system, and then the strong cold front ahead of it. You can see a band of showers that are thunderstorms are beginning to form out here in the central portion of Illinois. And we'll get to the severe weather analysis here in a minute, but this could become a little frisky later on today, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. They're going to be low top, but they could become quite strong later. And then right now across the southeastern portion of the United States, we have some pretty, decent showers and thunderstorms. Most of them are weakening at this point in time. But off the Gulf of Mexico, we have a pretty potent storm that formed off of the Gulf here that's producing some marine warnings out there. So be aware out there if you're boating. Basically, over the southeastern portion of the United States, it remains clear from New York all the way down to Florida. There's just some scattered high clouds associated with the subtropical jet. There might be some isolated coastal storms that take place. a little bit later today as the moisture now turns out of the south and southeast. But generally, everywhere from Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas westward, everything's pretty clear except for the northeastern or northwestern portion of the Intermountain West, where we see a storm system coming in there, producing some light showers and some snow showers. Now, looking at the western satellite, we can see that onshore flow into the west, but high pressure is beginning to build out here in the eastern Pacific. So we'll see those storm systems being shunted more towards the north here, and we might see a slight break here in some of the precipitation, but we will see some storms coming in a little bit later in the week here as we look at the 5-day here. Again, we see that storm system in the Intermountain West here. Nothing super strong with this particular storm, so we expect it not to be really intense at this point. Again, reviewing the current radar. Again, we have some scattered activity out here in the northwest, but most of our heaviest precipitation extends all the way from Michigan down to the Gulf Coast, with some icing taking place in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. That little band of thunderstorms over here in central Illinois. Mostly heavy rain across Indiana, extending all the way down to the Gulf Coast. However, there are some thunderstorms out there in Mississippi that with some it's a decaying line of thunderstorms, so I expect those thunderstorms to dissipate a little bit later today. So let's go into our severe weather analysis for today, and let's take a look at yesterday. If you remember right, our severe weather potential was mostly extending all the way from around central Illinois down to portions of Texas. However, most of the severe weather actually happened to the west of that as the storm system itself tend to slow down a little bit and not move as quick. And those thunderstorms that formed rather rapidly did produce a lot of hail and some wind damage reports. No significant events at this point, and there were no tornadoes. So even though there was a tornado watch in effect for portions of Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri, there were several storms up there that looked like they were going to rotate, but they just never really tightened up enough. And there were some very potent storms out here in southeastern Oklahoma, but they just never really got to the point of producing any tornadic activities. So that's a good thing, of course, but they did produce hail and wind damage. Now, looking at today's severe weather, we do have a patch of a slight risk of severe weather from around just west of Fort Wayne, Indiana, through Indianapolis down to Evansville. And that makes sense. There's a pretty potent little line of thunderstorms that's coming out of Illinois that will be enhanced a little bit later today. We should see some instability increase throughout the day in that area, so I would not be surprised that that's a good forecast there. And then we have another slight risk in effect from around central Tennessee all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Again, we have some good showers and thunderstorms in this area right now, and we'll talk a little bit about the stability here in this area, but I think the slight risk is probably about the highest they should go at this point. I think there's going to be some instability issues with this event. Moving right along, we're going to take a look at the dew points, and dew points range from the about the mid 50s all the way down to the around 70 degrees around New Orleans in that area there. It's not real. The depth of this moisture is not very high up here, but down here that we're seeing the depth of the moisture is up to around 700 millibars, around 10,000 feet. So the air is becoming very saturated. Looking at the skew T-plots in this area, there's not a lot of instability in place. So even though there's some cape, and we're going to look at that in a second here, the atmosphere is not really conducive to a major severe weather event taking place at this point. We're also noticing that the surface low is beginning to dissipate a little bit or weaken. It's still pretty strong. It's still below 1,000 millibars, but it's not quite as strong as it was out here in Kansas. Looking at the Cape values here, values range from around I'd say roughly 250 up to about 500, and then you get down into about 750 to over maybe close to 1,500 joules per kilogram down here around the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where those big storms are right now off the Gulf Coast. Nothing really happening over Alabama where the slight risk is, and things are kind of weak at this point in time. Cape values are pretty high where that little strong line is, so I expect that to increase as time goes on. But the instability is not super high looking at that at this time. And then when you look at the convective inhibition, there's still some pockets of inhibition out in those regions that are going to prevent some of those thunderstorms from taking off there. They're not, it's not super potent, and I expect this to weaken later today, but again, instability is going to be the main factor here that might prevent a more significant event taking place. Looking at the storm relative helicity, 3 kilometers, there's plenty of helicity in the atmosphere. Values range from about 300 to some areas up to about 500 units. So where those areas are about 500 or anything that's above 150 is significant for tornadoes. So obviously storms will rotate. Again, the limiting factor is going to be the instability and whether those storms can root to the ground. I would expect we'll probably see, if not a tornado watch, at least a severe thunderstorm watch for western portions of Indiana later today, as there's definitely some helicity and some Cape values. Again, they're kind of offset a little bit, so you kind of want those things lined up in place to be able to really kind of get the situation going there. Down here in the southeast, though, over Mississippi and Alabama, again, there's quite a bit of helicity there, but the instability is kind of lacking at this point. I would expect it would increase later today. However, with all the scattered showers and thunderstorms right now over central Alabama, I think there's going to be some stable air there, so the instability might be a little limited. So I would expect probably they'll issue a tornado watch, or at least a tornado watch, mainly, definitely a severe thunderstorm watch later today for these regions, but I think most of the activity as far as tornadoes will be pretty isolated. Looking at the lifted indices, there is a thin line of lifted indices of about -4 along that frontal boundary and that surface low. So again, there's obviously instability in that area. Values are mostly between 1 and -1 until you get down here into Mississippi and along the Gulf Coast, where values get down to about -5, some -6s out here right along the coast here. So definitely the more unstable atmosphere is closer to the Gulf Coast. Looking at the EHI values, the EHI values takes the helicity and the instability and combines them. They're not extremely screaming off the charts here. Again, most of the higher instability is off the coast here where those stronger thunderstorms are. So really anywhere from about Hattiesburg, Mississippi, south to the Gulf of Mexico has the greater risk right now of more of the dangerous storms than anything north of there. There's some lighter values up here in Illinois, but nothing significant at this point that's really screaming out, oh, this is a really bad situation. Looking at the supercell composite index, we have some scattered values below 1 here. There are some isolated 1 values out here across Memphis and Jackson and down here along the Gulf Coast, with a couple of values a little bit higher than that, maybe around 1.3, 1.5. And then looking at the significant tornado parameters, again, values are mostly under 5 until you get to around the purple areas where you get values around 1 or greater. So again, if we were to look at where the tornado parameters are going to be highest, again, they're going to be over the southeast. But, with the band of showers and thunderstorms that are over there right now, I think the instability is going to be preventing those types of storms to get into play there. It's going to be a lot of boundary collisions and things of that nature that's just going to keep the atmosphere messy. And this really makes sense. We look at the 3-hour HRRR model. Now, it's interesting. I was looking at the HRRR model at the 0 hour, and it was really missing a lot of the precipitation out here across Alabama. It had most of it back here in portions of Mississippi, so it completely missed that. Now the newer model is picking that up, and really, it's just a large mass of showers and thunderstorms. Nothing really significant that screams out supercells at this point, except until you get in the Gulf of Mexico. There's probably more broken lines of thunderstorms up in this region here, but because there's so much going on down here, the flows can be limited to making these more potent at this point. Obviously, a huge mass of snow up here. that's going to keep the near blizzard conditions up here in the upper portion of Michigan, and whoever's out there on the Lake Michigan is just going to have an awful mess at this point in time. So in regards to the severe weather event, when it comes to instability, there's plenty of moisture along the southeastern portion of the United States. It's just the instability of the atmosphere is not really going to be conducive to create that explosive thunderstorm conditions. So let's look at the winds here, and we're going to look at the 925 millibar. The main jet right now is, again, at this level, is we have a jet off the coast here that's mainly between 30 to 40 knots. It weakens a little bit, and then it begins to pick up a little bit again around the northwestern portion of Alabama, all the way up into Ohio, where it actually picks up to about 50 to 55 knots across Indiana. So any thunderstorms that pop up here are going to have definitely some backing of winds here. Looking at 850 millibars, and that low-level jet increases even more with winds from about 50 ranging all the way up to 65 knots in portions just west of Cleveland, Ohio. So again, there's quite a bit of speed shear. There's plenty of speed shear in place. Its directional shear is also increasing too. Unlike yesterday, the directional shear was kind of unidirectional. This shear today is a little more. We've got a little more directional shear in place. So I think the potential for tornadic activity is a little bit higher today, but the limiting factor is going to be the instability. Again, at 700 millibars, most of the storms will be moving off towards the east at a pretty decent clip, or northeast at a pretty decent clip between about 50 to 60 miles an hour in some spots even higher. So yeah, I mean, these storms are going to be moving very quick. Looking at 500 millibars, now this pattern's kind of weakened a little bit. We had a really strong jet approaching close to 120 knots out here in the eastern portion of the United States, or the central portion of the United States. But as it's moved towards the east here, it's kind of weakened and split apart here, and we actually have a couple of pieces of jet coming together here. With this converging air over the portion of over southern Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee, that's going to prevent thunderstorms to really be explosive in that area. And I think that was a good move for SPC to pull that slight risk out of there. However, there is, a limited amount of time for that slight risk, as we do have some a divergent air aloft, so that'll allow some venting. And there is some divergent air out here too across Mississippi and Alabama. Again, there's the jet stream's not super fast as it was yesterday, but the winds are still sufficient at this level, between about 60 and 70 knots. So again, this area is going to come under the right rear exit region, and then this area here will be over. Well, there's multiple lines here, so with the different jet maxes in place, that'll enhance thunderstorm activity as time goes on. Now, looking at the 300 millibar level, again, a completely different picture here. And again, we have a really strong jet max going north to south. So the storm system's going to be kind of the frontal boundary is going to kind of slow down a little bit with this kind of configuration here. The winds are pretty significant. The winds are going from about 115 to some spots up to 130 knots in some areas here. Where the potential is for severe weather down here across Mississippi and Alabama, the winds are significantly slower, and the winds are pulling away from there. So again, the venting aloft is not quite as strong, so the storms are not going to get up to about 60,000 feet down here. They're going to be a little bit weaker, but they will still be potentially strong here. So if one thing is just going to kind of slow the event down just a little bit. All right, let's move on to the aviation weather here at this point in time. We're looking at the convective segments in effect. Several convective segments across Illinois with tops up to 26,000 feet for thunderstorms. A band of showers and thunderstorms across Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee tops up to 33,000 feet, and thunderstorms across Mississippi and Alabama with tops between 35 and 40,000 feet. And expect thunderstorms to continue in those areas with convective segments and some thunderstorms over the southern two-thirds of Florida. There's also some thunderstorms that can be expected with the new trough that's moving into the northwest and Intermountain West across Idaho and Montana. Looking at turbulence with the northeasterly winds between 21 and 35,000 feet. There's moderate turbulence with a convective turbulence segment there, but I would expect also turbulence to continue across that region with the strong jet stream. No icing segments in effect at this time. Okay, so let's take a look at our 5-day outlook here, starting with today. The 18Z chart today shows the upper level low sitting around Davenport, Iowa, with several vortice maxes heading out above that. This is a little bit different than yesterday. Yesterday had this upper level low a little bit in this region here between Indiana and Illinois. Or Indiana and Ohio. It's been moved back, so it's slowing down just a little bit. Looking at the surface low will be about 997 millibars, still quite strong, with the surface front back draped across Mississippi there. And we have another upper level low out here around Canada and Montana with scattered snow showers and rain showers across the west. Southwest remains clear at this point in time. Taking a look at Friday, that upper level low weakens and shears out in towards the northeastern portion of the United States. A new upper level low begins to form over South Dakota. It's got a negative tilt to it, so it's quite vigorous. Looking at the surface chart, the surface low begins to form over South Dakota. We get quite a bit of snow bands forming up to the north of it and some scattered showers out ahead of it. And then the main storm system that's affecting the central, the Ohio River Valley right now speeds off towards the northeast and begins to weaken as time goes on. Looking at Saturday, that upper level low that was in South Dakota begins to shear out towards Iowa, and a new low begins to form out here in the desert southwest. Unfortunately, the conditions are not going to be conducive for precipitation, so they're not going to get any way of rain. However, on the surface chart, we do see upslope snows forming across Colorado, and that system that's out here in South Dakota begins to move off to the east and weaken. The frontal boundary that was associated with the main system that is moving through today begins to break up and stall across the Gulf Coast states. So they're going to have kind of an on and off rain down there on Saturday. Looking at Easter Sunday, that trough that is in the southwest is not quite as strong on this run. The previous runs, it was showing quite a bit of kind of intense, but now it's showing a little more, being a little more progressive and weakening as it moves towards the east. So I think our threat for severe weather on Easter is waning a little bit. However, I would not be quick to say that there's not going to be some thunderstorms out there to keep an eye on out here across Arkansas and so forth and across the southeast, but I think the chances for severe weather are lessened quite a bit. We'll have to continue to watch the models, but I think there's a good likelihood the threat's not going to be quite as great. And across the northwest here, we'll begin to see another storm system begin to come into the northwest with scattered showers and snow on Easter. Now, looking on Monday, we're beginning to see something a little bit different here. We have strong high pressure ridge forming in the central portion of the United States, so temperatures will be on the rise there. Our trough across the east will be moving out over the next couple of days and off the coast here, but we have a stronger storm system coming into the west here that's going to be bowling balling into the southwest here later in the week, and we're starting to see consistency in the models on this, and it concerns me a little bit about what could be happening next week. Looking at the surface features, we have a pretty strong surface low forming out here just north of Las Vegas. Now, obviously it's over land, so there's not a lot of precipitation south and east of that, but quite a bit of snow forming out here It should be some pretty significant snows, I would expect also. The upper level low and storm system that was whipping through easily, that was kind of weak, kind of intensifies as it moves off the east coast there, but I don't think it's going to be a significant factor except for some wraparound moisture loss across the east coast there. Taking a look at Tuesday, this low begins to really slow down a little bit and begin to strengthen as it moves towards the southwest here. Quite a bit of energy is coming into this storm system. And if we look at the surface features are strengthening also. Have a lot of excuse me, a lot of flow out of the southwest, so there's going to be some dry air here. But what we're also seeing is, instead of the high pressure system sending over the Gulf Coast like we did with this last storm, where it was kind of blocking the flow out of the Gulf, the flow out of the Gulf is a little more open here. So as this storm system begins to pull out, I think there's going to be plenty of time to get moisture northward and set up a stage here where we might begin to see a greater risk for severe thunderstorms next week, possibly Wednesday and Thursday of next week, as this storm system begins to pull out. But again, we're sitting about 5 days out here. The models have been all over the place. So we'll have to monitor this condition and be aware that maybe next week we might see an uptick in severe weather, and it may be a greater threat than what we've seen in quite a while. And we've seen some pretty decent events, but this one might be a little bit more significant going into next week. And we are reaching kind of the height of the tornado season in April and May here, so we should see an increase of that activity over the next few weeks as we move in towards a more warmer and stormier period. Looking at the 5-day precipitation and snowfall totals, a lot of precipitation in the northwest, which is great, especially for the mountains for snow, and a lot of precipitation really from around the Mississippi River eastward. The concerns are as the southwest continues to remain dry and kind of in drought conditions here, and then we're seeing quite a bit of dry patches continuing across West Texas and the Panhandles and into portions of Kansas. So not a lot of precipitation in these areas yet. We'll have to monitor these and see what happens over the next few days, but especially over the next few weeks. But there's some indications that we might begin to see some precipitation coming in these regions later in the next couple of weeks. We'll have to see. But a lot of precipitation is going to be falling along the Gulf Coast over the next several days. The models are showing anywhere from 2 to maybe 4 inches of rain, so already over a pretty aggravated condition, so people need to be aware of potential flooding there. Looking at snowfall, a lot of snow in the Intermountain West across Idaho and Montana and Wyoming, which is good, and into Colorado, which is very good. And then there's some more snow, especially with this last storm system. It's going to be mostly above the United States here, mostly in Canada. So not a lot of snow anywhere else, and we'll begin to see this disappear as time goes on. So in summary, we have the severe weather potential today that we need to be alert for. Again, there's a potential for some isolated severe weather, especially some isolated tornadoes. It's not a huge threat, but that potential is there. We are in spring, and we need to be aware of that. There's the severe weather threat that lessens for Easter, but I think there's a potential for a bigger event next week, and we'll keep you posted as we get closer to that. But I think we have to remain alert to that, and that means that, we're going to have a very active weather pattern next week. So anyway, we thank you for watching. We appreciate you taking the time to see what kind of weather is going on today. We'll keep you advised throughout the day of the severe weather, and have a good day.